if you were the wealthiest, wisest, richest, smartest, best author, whatever your goal is in the world, but it was just you in the world, how long do you think you would be happy for? My guess is if it was me, probably not long. And so today I want to talk to you guys about something that came up this week with me, which is relationships. And I'm not a guru or an expert. I just want to share some of the things that I've learned. Then hopefully they'll help you. And as I learn from other people, I try to implement things that I'm finding. And so I hope some of these serve you and help you. And I've adopted a couple things from psychologists, authors that have really helped me. And so it's kind of like this cycle of sharing and trying things. So as I reference my notes here, whether you're starting a business, starting a family, whether you want to be a top salesperson, whether you want to, whatever it is that you want to do, relationships are like, they're inevitable. They're going to happen. They're all over life. And so the point of this is like, it's more of a journey, right? Like, I don't think, I kind of have later on in my notes, like, I think it'll take me my entire lifetime to get any sense of mastery with respect to relationships because they're really hard. People come in all kinds of different packages, if you will, different backgrounds, experiences, even within families, right? Like how crazy, like people are just so different within families, even like my mom is a twin and even from her brother, like how different she is. And so I don't think there's ever a destination that you arrive to, but I think there's levels of mastery. And there are some things that I've learned along the way. And this was precipitated from a conversation that I had this week. And why relationships? I had a good friend this week that called me kind of in a somewhat of an emergency situation and was like, hey, I think I'm going to get divorced and going through the separation process, all this stuff. And it had me thinking, like, number one, it's heartbreaking to hear that. Because you know that person is just, it's hard to even imagine the amount of pain that they're going through and all of the stuff. And there's this, like, in the conversation, it was like this reflection of like, I don't want to have a failed marriage and all this stuff. And so it's, you, as a friend, you carry that weight on you that somebody else is bringing along. Cause it's like, that's empathy, right? It's like, it doesn't feel good for them to go through that. And so I hope by putting this out there, it makes people more aware of certain things. It makes you more thankful for the relationships that you do have in your life. It makes you think about them differently. We talked about gratitude in a past video, and I think there are gratitude practices that are super helpful. It was also relevant because this weekend there was like a bunch of stuff that happened to me personally this weekend with like some interesting people that were saying kind of nasty stuff. I don't know if they were mentally unwell or like they were, I don't know what the situation was, but I ran into a couple people this weekend where there was tension and it caused me to reflect a lot. And so this whole thing of like relationships, interacting with other people has been on my top of my mind this week because it's just such a critical part of life. Like everything we do involves other people. If you I think if you're a finance person, if you want to start a company, if you want to have kids, there's always other people involved. And so, yeah, I just don't think there's enough wisdom that can be shared on this topic. So with that being said, relationships are challenging. Things that are challenging can be rewarding. Mastering relationships is not easy. I'm confident it will take me my entire life. So here's some of the things that I've learned along the way so far, studying relationships. And my background's in psychology. I love people. I love understanding why people do what they do. It's like my number one interest. And so I think the most important thing, like let's start with number one, like what's the most important relationship you'll ever have? It's the relationship with yourself. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is an amazing psychologist, amazing author. He has a book that talks about, I believe the title is Become Your Future Self Now. And it's really interesting. It talks about how we look at our present self through the lens of our past self or through the lens of our future self. And it's like very complicated. And I've had to like listen to podcasts and listen to pieces of the book multiple times just to understand a high level concept. But because the most important relationship you're going to ever have is with yourself, you want to be mindful of how you treat yourself, how you talk to yourself, what your inner dialogue is, of course, right? Like, this is like super important. And so a good example of this, based on Dr. Benjamin Hardy's book, is like he talks about how you'll be different 5 minutes from now. You watching this, you'll be different after this video. Not because I'm amazing and I'm some guru, but because we're always changing and adapting and absorbing. And so where I'm going with this is like, if you have regrets, or there's things from the past, or there's situations that you maybe didn't handle so well, or you didn't, hit milestones the way you wanted to, or you gave up on a goal, whatever, you need to be careful of how you're framing those things, because even trauma, you can frame challenges, you can frame things that you come up against in a way that benefits you, in a way that you're like, I learned from this. This is what I got out of it. I know I'm not going to go down that path again. Or if I did, I would try it differently. I would do this. And so you're different every 5 minutes. And so you with that mindset, you give yourself some empathy. You give yourself some, not get off the hook. Like, if you do the wrong thing, like, you need to go make right for it. But you're not intentionally over hard on yourself, because you realize you're constantly adapting and changing, and you realize that you're on this growth trajectory. You don't have a fixed mindset, and so your future self will be even more improved than your current self. So how you frame your past is hugely important. Another really incredible book talking about, from the perspective of a Jewish person in a concentration camp, trying to find peace and joy and hope in that. Viktor Frankl has an incredible book that has been referenced through multiple books that I've read, and through a ton of stuff that I've studied. And it's really interesting, because if someone in that situation can find hope and can find joy, like, you're not a special snowflake. I'm not a special snowflake. Someone in that situation can do it. You can do it. I can do it. So how you frame traumas and things that have happened from the past is really, really critical. There's always some way to frame it in a way that actually benefits you, versus just victimizing and like taking yourself out of the control seat, taking yourself out of absorbing anything creative or helpful about it. So be mindful of how you frame your past. Be mindful of continually moving the goalpost. I think he talks about this a little bit in the book. I know that Sean Acker talked about this in the Happiness Advantage book from like years ago. That constantly moving that goalpost and never celebrating wins, and always having this like, yeah, but it could have been more. Yeah, I could have done better. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, again, has another book on this called The Gap and the Gain. I haven't read it, but I know enough about it to know it's kind of that goalpost moving mindset of like, you just have to be mindful of constantly doing that, because it's not a high performance mindset. It's like you're always living in the gap. You're always living in the delta of it could have been better. It should have been this. It should have been that. And so that's not great either. So how you frame your past and how you frame your future is really important. And it changes who you are in the present. It has the power to. So that's the most important relationship you'll ever have, is the one with yourself. And so make sure you're taking care of that. You cannot force someone to change. This came up this week talking to my friend, going through this, this decade-long marriage and going through that whole situation. Like, it's really unfortunate. I know for me, and I know for probably some of you watching, like, a lot of us need to hit rock bottom in order for us to really get it, in order for us to really desire, have a strong enough why to start changing. And so you cannot bring that conclusion to someone without their will. Like, they have to want to change. And so you can't make people change. You can be there for them as they try to. You can support them in changing. But in this conversation with a friend, you have to decide on what that distance is for you. Do you really want to take 5 years? If it's an unknown amount of time, like, if someone hasn't agreed to start the process, it could be a really long time. And so are you prepared to be around for that? You have to start thinking through these things, but you cannot force someone to change. And oftentimes I don't know why Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot in his research on like the mind-body connection, but a lot of us need to hit rock bottom before we can decide that we want to do better. I wish it wasn't that way, but from what I've observed, it very much is. Another quote that goes around, this is like, you've probably heard of this before, but hurt people hurt people. So people that are hurt other people that are hurt. It's not intentional. I have one other quote about this later on, but we pick up things through life. Dr. Michael Singer, I don't know if he's actually a doctor. He's like a Buddhist teacher guy, and he's really interesting. But he talks about, it's really interesting visualization of people going through life and basically picking up garbage. And they end up with this like Santa Claus level of like emotional trauma that they're carrying around that they just didn't need to. And so it's important to be mindful that like, how does that relate to hurt people? We're all carrying different garbage, I guess. And so when your garbage comes up against somebody else's garbage and then it offends them and whatever, most people aren't just maliciously out trying to get you or trying to argue with you. Your spouse is like loading the dishwasher the way that they were taught. It's like not that big of a deal. And so many of these conversations for me at work, at home with friends, they're just so trivial. Like the conversation's so trivial. Like I actually don't care if we disagree or whatever. It doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of life. And so realizing that no one, for the most part, people aren't intentionally, they're not trying to hit you with their garbage on purpose. They have things from their past, you have things from your past, and you guys are seeing life from a different perspective. You're seeing the accident, if you will, from different perspectives. And sometimes people, there's not one perspective that's right or wrong. They're just different. And so hurt people, and it's good to be aware that it's probably not malicious. Even if other people don't want to improve, it shouldn't hold you back from improving. So you might be in a situation where someone's stuck, they haven't hit rock bottom, they just don't care, they're happy with where they're at. That doesn't have to stop you from going on a journey of exploring what growth looks like, what enhancing relationships in your life, at work, at home, with your family. It shouldn't hold you back from doing that. I think a lot of times people will get stuck in a friend group or they'll get stuck in a relationship, and it holds them back from wanting to improve themselves, wanting to do things to their body, to their mindset that are healthy for them, and then wanting to go out and engage with the world in certain photography group or a bike riding class or whatever, like do things that would be healthy for them. And sometimes people can get held back with regard to relationships and self-growth, especially because someone in their social circle is kind of holding them back. And so you want to be aware of that and, not get stuck. I talked about this is the one I'll end on, which is just picking up garbage. Like we go through life, and I'll give the example from this weekend. So this weekend I was at a checkout. I was at a grocery store. I just wanted to see it. It was in a little town that I like. Drove there. It was cool. And I had never been there before. I grew up not far from it, and I'd never seen this grocery store. It was like a little market. And there was a guy in there, and we're on the way out, and I wasn't really near him. We didn't talk. We were in totally separate checkout lines, and the guy's like started cursing under his breath, and it was quiet enough where I'm assuming he didn't think anyone was going to hear. And so I turned around and I'm like, are you talking to me? Like what's going on here? And there was no one else around. And so I'm like, I just kind of brushed it off. He didn't look like, he had any issues. He was like in a nice car, like well dressed, whatever. And I get to my car and he's like packing. We happen to be parked like kind of across from one another, and he's like packing his car, and he's like looking at me the whole time, like taking his stuff from the car into his trunk, and he's just like effing blah blah blah, like saying all this stuff get directed at me. And I'm like, I was gonna get out of my car, and the old me probably would have and been like, what's your effing deal, like whatever. And I'm like, it bothered me because I don't, maybe I was driving annoying or something when I got there, and maybe there was context, maybe there was cause for him to be frustrated with me, and that was why I was curious, because I do want to improve, but the way that I was prepared to handle it would not have gone well. And I'm like, and I had just the night before I was reading Proverbs, and it was like, there is no reasoning with a fool. Like fools don't want wisdom. Like they're not looking for wisdom. Don't try to give wisdom to a fool. They're not going to receive it well. And I'm like, not that guy was a fool, but I'm like, this conversation is just not going to go anywhere, especially with how I feel in that moment. I felt frustrated and charged with anger. And I'm like, this is, I can't recall anything that I did that would have led to him being frustrated with me. Maybe it was the car I drove, maybe it was some other thing. And I'm like, you know what? I just don't, there's nothing here in my disposition that I can recall doing that necessitates having this conversation. I'm going to write it off and let it go. And that happened a couple times this weekend, so maybe I am the problem, I don't know. But be mindful of the garbage that you go up through life and you pick up. You'll throw your proverbial back out picking up garbage that you don't need to carry. I didn't need to pick up that guy's remarks towards me. Like, they didn't add value to me. They didn't add value to him. He probably didn't feel any better saying them. And so I'm glad that like I was able to just drop that and not think about it, because we just, through the course of a week or a month or a year, it's like, how many of those do we pick up on? And then we wonder why we're in a mood, and that mood becomes a personality trait, and then that personality trait becomes a complete personality disposition for no reason. So be mindful of what you're picking up. I hope these serve you, and I'll see you guys in the next one.